His voice sliced through the dining hall, sharp, precise, meant to wound. "So this is who you are? Stealing from us on your first week?" The new maid froze mid-polish. The cloth slipped slightly from her fingers as she realized every pair of eyes in the room had already turned toward her, judging before she even breathed. The heir, immaculate suit, flawless posture, cruelty practiced, held up a golden bracelet like a hunter displaying a trophy. The bracelet gleamed. His satisfaction gleamed brighter. "It was in the hallway," he said, stepping closer, "right where you walked, and no one else here would ever need to take it." The matriarch straightened in her chair. The father lowered his newspaper. The younger siblings watched with detached curiosity. A silent verdict hovered over the room. Guilty, because it was easier that way. He closed the remaining distance, invading her space with the confidence de quem nunca precisou temer consequência alguma. "Speak," he demanded. "I want to hear you admit it. You were careless, or you were stealing. Which one is it?" Her heart kicked hard inside her chest, not from fear, but from the cruel absurdity of being accused simply because she was the most convenient target. They didn't even hesitate. "My word weighs nothing here." Slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. He didn't expect that. Her eyes didn't tremble. Her voice didn't break. "I didn't touch your bracelet, sir." The smile on his face died instantly, as if someone had snuffed out a flame. The sisters' brows knit in surprise. The matriarch gripped the armrest. The father pretended to resume reading, though the stiffness in his hands betrayed irritation. They wanted compliance. They wanted her to bow her head and wear the blame so their world remained smooth and undisturbed. But she didn't bend. And that tiny act of dignity unsettled the man who thrived on her silence. He leaned in so close she could smell the expensive cologne layered over entitlement. "I said I'm watching you," he murmured, each word coated with threat. He slipped the bracelet into his pocket with a theatrical flourish, as though he'd just finished a performance for an audience eager to applaud. But the only thing truly ending was his illusion of total control. She picked the cloth back up and resumed her work, quietly, steadily, refusing to shrink. The shift was almost invisible, but the air felt it. A crack, subtle, yet undeniable, opening beneath the surface. Not defiance, not challenge, simply dignity, something he did not know how to dominate. And in that fragile silence, in that small refusal to break, the first fracture appeared. The same fracture through which the truth would later escape, no matter how hard he tried to bury it. Eleanor resumed wiping the polished table surface, slow, steady, deliberate, as if Nathan Hale's humiliation a moment earlier had been nothing more than dust she could brush away. But Nathan kept staring at her, eyes narrowing the longer he watched. Something in her calmness scraped against him like sand under glass. "Don't scratch the table," Nathan snapped, though she was nowhere near scratching it. Her hand paused for a fraction of a second, barely perceptible. But he noticed, because he was waiting for her to break. People like Elena always broke, at least in his world they did. She simply shifted the cloth to her other hand and continued. Controlled, grounded, not submissive. That control irritated Nathan more than any defensive outburst would have. He stepped behind her, close enough that she felt the warmth of his presence like a warning pressed against her spine. Margaret Hale watched from her chair, a quiet disapproval tightening her jaw. Charles Hale hid behind his newspaper again, pretending detachment. Sophie Hale's gaze lingered, curious, unsettled. "Look at me when I speak to you," Nathan ordered. Elena turned slowly, lifting her eyes to meet his. No defiance, no fear, just presence, quiet and human. It shook him more than it should have. "You're new here," Nathan continued, trying to thicken his voice with authority. "You need to understand your place, and your place is listening when I talk." A tiny pulse throbbed in Elena's jaw, an internal flinch, unseen by the room. If I respond too firmly, I'm insolent. If I stay silent, I look guilty. She walked the narrow line with precision. "I am listening, Mr. Hale." He expected submission. It didn't sound like submission. Nathan's breath hitched almost imperceptibly, his hands shoved into his pockets to keep them from fidgeting. Margaret's eyes sharpened. Charles's paper crinkled, and Sophie leaned forward slightly, as though sensing cracks forming under the surface. "You should at least apologize," Nathan insisted. "That's what decent people do when they create trouble." Trouble? My crime is simply existing where he can see me, Eleanor thought, a slow throb settling behind her ribs. Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again, not hesitation, but calibration. She lifted her gaze with a gentleness that disarmed more than confrontation ever could. "I'm sorry you believe I created trouble, Mr. Hale." Silence hit the room like a dropped glass. Sophie blinked. Charles froze behind his newspaper. Margaret's fingers dug into the armrest, and Nathan's expression cracked, a flicker of shock breaking through his polished arrogance. It was the softest refusal he had ever heard, a polite boundary wrapped in obedience, and it cornered him. He stepped closer, voice dropping into something darker. "You're playing a dangerous game." Elena didn't step back. Not an inch. "I'm just doing my job, sir." She turned away, placing one last smooth stroke across the table, ending the conversation with a calmness he could not dominate. That small turn of her shoulders seared more deeply than any raised voice could, because for the first time that morning, Nathan Hale felt something unfamiliar and terrifying. Her silence had weight, her presence had shape, and she was not nearly as breakable as he needed her to be. The crack inside him widened. Nathan didn't move at first. He just stood there, staring at Elena's back as she finished wiping the table with that maddening steadiness. Something in him tightened, an irritation that felt dangerously close to insecurity. He hated the feeling, and hated even Maid de Ondevigna. Elena sensed the tension behind her before she turned, not because of fear, but because the air around Nathan always changed when he felt challenged. She kept her hands folded over the cloth, waiting for instructions, because that was the only safe thing she could do in a room where everyone already wanted a reason para duvidar dela. Margaret Hale broke the silence first. "Nathan," she said with a pointed calmness, "come sit down. You've made your point." But he hadn't. Not to himself. Nathan pulled out a chair roughly, making the wood scrape against the floor. The sound jolted through the room, and Charles Hale lowered the newspaper with an annoyed sigh. "We're trying to have breakfast," Charles muttered. Nathan pretended not to hear. He wasn't done with Elena. Something about her quiet poise made him feel watched, as if she were holding up a mirror he didn't want to look into. "Elena," Margaret called sharply, "set the plates again, properly this time." The command wasn't really about plates. It was about re-establishing hierarchy. Elena nodded gently and began arranging the settings, one by one, precise, almost ceremonial. Nathan followed her movements with a restless gaze, waiting for a mistake, waiting for anything that would prove her unworthy, unreliable, inferior, something to justify the weight of the accusation he'd thrown on her. But she didn't fall hard. Her hands moved steady, disciplined, elegant-ate, and that irritated him under Mars. When she placed the fork beside Nathan's plate, her hand passed near his arm. He inhaled sharply, not because of her proximity, but because she didn't tremble. Not once. Most people did around him. She didn't. "So careless earlier," he murmured low enough for only her to hear, "and suddenly perfect." Eleanor didn't look at him. "Nothing has changed, Mr. Hale." But something had changed. Nathan felt it like a bruise forming beneath the skin. Sophie Hale watched the exchange with quiet fascination. Legs crossed, chin resting on her hand. "She's not shaking, Nathan. Maybe she's just telling the truth," she said casually. Margaret shot her daughter a warning look. "Don't encourage disrespect." Sophie lifted her shoulders. "I didn't say anything disrespectful." Nathan's jaw clenched. Elena placed the last spoon on the table and stepped back, ready to leave the dining room. That's when Nathan spoke again, sharper than intended. "Stop." She froze, not out of fear, but because stopping was safer than disobedience. Nathan stood, pulling the bracelet from his pocket once more, letting it dangle from his fingers. "This," he said, raising it just enough for everyone to see, "was found near the east hallway. Elena was the only one there." Charles groaned. "Nathan, enough." We already went through this. We didn't get answers, Nathan shot back. Elena finally lifted her gaze. No tears, no tremor. Just a quiet certainty that made Nathan's skin prickle. "Mr. Hale," she said softly, "if holding that bracelet makes you feel safer, I understand." The room stilled. Nathan's throat tightened. He didn't know why that sentence hit him so hard, but it did, like she had reached past his anger, past his arrogance, touching something he had buried so deep he no longer recognized it. Margaret frowned, confused. Sophie's lips parted slightly, noticing the shift. Charles stared at Elena with something resembling curiosity. Nathan stepped forward, closer than before, eyes colder. "What is that supposed to mean?" Elena didn't retreat. She didn't challenge. She simply let the truth sit between them, quiet and dignified. "It means," she said, "you're holding the wrong thing responsible." A flicker, fear, anger, something wounded, crossed Nathan's face before he masked it again. He snapped the bracelet shut in his fist. "Get out," he whispered. Elena bowed her head politely and walked away without rushing. Her footsteps foram tão leves quanto antes, mas agora cada passo parecia empurrar Nathan mais fundo, dentro do próprio desconforto. And as he watched her leave, he realized something that scared him more than he'd ever admit. Elena Brooks wasn't breaking. She was revealing him. Elena stepped out of the dining room with the same steady pace she had used moments earlier, but the hallway air felt different now, denser, sharpened by accusation. She held the cloth in her hand not as a tool, but as something to anchor herself to, because if she stopped moving, the weight of the morning would settle too quickly on her chest. A housemaid carrying linens walked toward her, then abruptly veered to the side, avoiding eye contact. News traveled fast in the Hale mansion, especially the kind that made someone easy to blame. Elena stole the bracelet. It didn't matter that it wasn't true. Rumor always outran reality. She kept walking anyway. Work was the only safe rhythm she had. Back in the dining room, Nathan Hale remained still, staring at the door as if expecting Eleanor to return and undo whatever quiet shift she had caused inside him. He hadn't meant to let anyone see that crack, least of all her. Margaret Hale exhaled sharply. "Nathan, sit down. You've made your point." But he hadn't. Not to himself. He pulled out his chair too forcefully, scraping it across the floor. Charles Hale lowered his newspaper with annoyance. "We're trying to have breakfast," Charles muttered. Nathan ignored him. His mind replayed Elena's last words. "I'm sorry you believe I created trouble," with an unsettling clarity. They weren't defiant. They weren't submissive. They were honest. And honesty left no room for him to hide. Sophie Hale watched him with thinly veiled interest. "You're acting strange," she said lightly. "She didn't do anything except answer you." Nathan shot her a cold look. "Stay out of it." But everyone felt the nerve she had pressed. Meanwhile, Elena moved down the hallway toward the kitchen, aware of the subtle shift in every gaze that passed her way. Some curious, some dismissive, some quietly suspicious. The kind of stares that made a person shrink if they weren't careful. She refused to shrink. Entering the kitchen, she found the head housekeeper, Mrs. Clarkson, arms crossed and face tight with judgment. "Eleanor," she said curtly, "what was that scene in the dining room? People are already talking." Eleanor kept her voice even. "Mr. Hale believes I misplaced his bracelet." "Believes?" Mrs. Clarkson raised a brow. "So it wasn't you?" "No, ma'am." The housekeeper's mouth pressed into a thin line, as if the truth was inconvenient. "Be careful. The Hales don't appreciate staff who argue." Elena lowered her head respectfully, but inside her mind the words rearranged themselves into something far more revealing. They don't like staff who argue, but they fear staff who see too much. Mrs. Clarkson turned away, and Elena began preparing the service cart for the upstairs rooms. Her movements were steady, but her thoughts drifted to the moment in the dining room, the tightening of Nathan's jaw, the flicker of something vulnerable behind his anger, the way he clung to that bracelet as if it were armor. She pushed the cart down the main corridor. As she passed Charles Hale's office door, slightly ajar, her eyes caught a glimpse of a folder on the desk, red markings, a name at the top, Nathan Hale. She looked away immediately. Not her business. Not her place. But then she heard footsteps behind her. Heavy, restless, familiar. Nathan. He hadn't cooled down at all. "Elena," he called, his voice low, carved from frustration he wasn't ready to name. She steadied the cart before turning. "Yes, Mr. Hale." He stopped far too close. His expression was tight, not angry exactly, but unsettled, the way someone looks when something inside them is slipping out of their grasp. "Next time," he said quietly, "choose your words more carefully." She didn't blink, didn't retreat. "I will choose them honestly, sir." The sentence landed between them like a stone thrown into a still lake, sending quiet ripples into places Nathan didn't want touched. His jaw locked. His breath faltered for a half-second, just enough for her to notice. And as she turned back to the service cart, ready to continue her work, Nathan realized something that unnerved him more than anything she had said. Elena Brooks was not breaking. She was exposing him. Elena pushed the service cart down the hallway, sensing Nathan's stare burning into her back long after she'd turned the corner. She didn't look back. Looking back meant giving him something: fear, apology, space. She wasn't willing to give him any of those. Only when she reached the kitchen did she allow her breath to deepen. The room fell silent the moment she entered. Mrs. Clarkson appeared from behind the pantry shelves, arms folded tightly. "I heard there was a scene," the housekeeper said. "The family is concerned about your conduct." Elena kept her tone steady. "I followed instructions, ma'am." "So you say," Mrs. Clarkson muttered, "but Mrs. Hale expects the staff to maintain harmony. Try not to provoke Nathan again." Provoke. The word sat heavily in the air, as if Eleanor had chosen the conflict rather than endured it. "Yes, ma'am," she replied simply. She loaded the service cart and headed toward the stairs, feeling the shift in the house, the way whispers spread faster than truth. As she climbed to the second floor, she almost collided with Ethan Hale, the youngest of the family. His sketchbook hit his chest as he caught it quickly. Sorry," he murmured. "It's all right," she answered softly. He studied her expression, hesitated, then whispered, "Nathan was rough with you, wasn't he?" Eleanor didn't respond, but the silence told him enough. "For what it's worth," Ethan said, lowering his voice, "I don't think you stole anything. Nathan, he gets overwhelmed and lashes out." It was a small kindness, but it reached her more deeply than she wanted to admit. "Thank you, Ethan," she said gently. He nodded and hurried down the stairs before anyone could see them talking. Elena continued along the hallway, stopping briefly as she passed Charles Hale's office. The door was slightly ajar, and inside she glimpsed a folder marked with Nathan's name, pages covered in red notes. She stepped away immediately. Whatever the family hid was not safe for her to know. "Elena!" Mrs. Clarkson's voice echoed again as she approached briskly. "I spoke with Mrs. Hale," she said. "Given recent concerns, they've installed cameras in some hallways for accountability." The word landed coldly. "You'll be monitored closely," Mrs. Clarkson added. "Don't draw attention to yourself. Nathan is under pressure." Pressure, always an excuse for cruelty. "I understand," Elena said, though what she understood was far wider than the housekeeper intended. As she pushed the cart toward the guest rooms, a small blinking red light caught her attention. One of the new cameras. Its angle covered not only the hallway, but the door Nathan often used. Elena walked beneath it without a second thought, unaware that the quiet footage it captured would soon matter more than anyone expected. Downstairs, Nathan marched into his father's office. "Dad, we need to talk about the staff." "Not now," Charles interrupted sharply, not looking up. The same folder Elena had seen lay open on the desk. Nathan glanced at it but didn't read the pages. He left the office restless, frustrated, and far more threatened than he allowed himself to admit. And as the house settled into an uneasy quiet, one truth became impossible to ignore. Every thread of tension, Nathan's temper, the family's suspicion, the new surveillance, was slowly tightening around one person, Eleanor Brooks. By the next morning, the mansion had shifted. The halls felt tighter, quieter. People who usually greeted Elena now glanced away. Others watched her openly, waiting for her to slip. The new cameras blinked on the walls, small red lights that followed her like silent accusations. Carrying a basket of linens, she walked past the sitting room. Margaret Hale's voice floated through the door. "This is exactly why we needed supervision. That girl behaves like someone who could steal." Eleanor froze for a breath, not long enough to be noticed, but long enough for the words to settle like dust in her lungs. Charles murmured agreement. Sophie said nothing, but Elena felt her gaze through the doorway. When she entered, the room fell silent. Margaret straightened immediately. "The investigator arrives today," she said. "You'll answer his questions directly." "Yes, Mrs. Hale," Eleanor replied. "Honesty protects the innocent," Margaret added, her tone implying the opposite. Eleanor bowed her head and stepped back into the corridor, only to find Nathan waiting near the stairs. He wasn't leaning casually this time. His posture was tight, his jaw set. When he spoke, his voice wavered between authority and uncertainty. "The investigator is here because of you," Nathan said. "If you're innocent, you shouldn't be afraid." Elena met his eyes calmly. "Fear comes from being blamed without being heard, sir." Nathan inhaled sharply, as if the words hit somewhere he wasn't prepared for. "You're complicating this," he muttered. "Just follow the rules." "I do," she answered softly. Her steadiness unsettled him again. He opened his mouth to speak, but was interrupted by Charles calling from upstairs. "Nathan!" "They're ready for you." He hesitated, just enough to reveal something he didn't want to show, then turned and walked away. Eleanor stood alone in the corridor, the red camera light blinking above her like a warning. The house was closing in around her, tightening its grip. But beneath the pressure was a quiet truth. The more they watched her, the more they would expose what they were trying so hard not to see. The investigator arrived within the hour, a tall man with a neutral expression and a clipboard tucked under his arm. His presence shifted the entire house. Doors that were usually open closed halfway. Footsteps softened. Even the air seemed to wait. Elena was placing fresh towels in the guest bathroom when Mrs. Clarkson entered abruptly. "He wants to speak with you next," she said. "Be concise." "Don't look defensive." Elena nodded, even though defensiveness was the last thing she felt. What she felt was exhaustion, the kind that builds quietly when someone is forced to justify their own innocence. She followed Mrs. Clarkson down the hall to the study, where the investigator stood beside a camera monitor showing multiple feeds. The blinking red lights she'd walked under now stared back at her from the screen. He gestured for her to sit. "Elena Brooks, correct?" "Yes, sir." His tone was calm but measured. "I'm not here to accuse you. I'm here to understand the environment in this house." That sentence alone surprised her. He continued, "I've spoken with the family. Now I want your perspective." Elena hesitated, not because she didn't know what to say, but because she wasn't sure what the truth would cost her. Still, she answered carefully, "I do my work with respect. I haven't taken anything." The investigator studied her quietly. "Has anyone in the household pressured you, raised their voice, treated you unfairly?" Her breath tightened. Nathan's face flashed in her mind. His accusations, his proximity, his desperation to maintain control. She chose her words with precision. "Some moments have been difficult, but I continue my duties." The investigator nodded slowly, as though that confirmed something he had already suspected. Before she could stand, the office door opened and Nathan stepped inside. His eyes immediately went to Elena, sharp, restless, as if worried about what she might have said. The investigator turned to him. "Mr. Hale, I'm reviewing the camera footage you installed. I'll need to speak with you again shortly." Nathan gave a small, tense nod, but kept his gaze locked on Elena. There was something unspoken in it, fear, frustration, maybe guilt. She couldn't tell. "Eleanor," the investigator said, "you may go for now." She stood and walked past Nathan, who shifted slightly, as if fighting the impulse to stop her. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Out in the hallway, Eleanor exhaled slowly. For the first time, The cameras no longer felt like silent enemies. They felt like witnesses. Something in the investigator's eyes had changed when he mentioned the footage. Something Nathan had noticed too. And as Elena continued down the corridor, she sensed it clearly. The truth had begun to move, quietly, but unmistakably. Elena walked through the upper hallway with a steady calm, though tension threaded through every corner of the house. After speaking with the investigator, something had shifted in the air, an uneasiness that Nathan could no longer hide. She felt it in the way doors closed more quickly, in how conversations dimmed when she appeared, and especially in the silence that followed her footsteps. As she passed the library, a small voice drifted out. Ethan sat alone on the carpet, sketchbook in his lap, shoulders drawn tight. "I didn't mean to make him angry," he whispered. Elena stepped inside gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, Ethan." He looked up, worry clouding his eyes. "Nathan said asking questions makes me look weak. Is that true?" Elena knelt beside him, her voice soft but firm. "No. Asking questions means you're paying attention. That's strength, not weakness." Ethan absorbed the words slowly, as if they were something rare in the house. Footsteps sounded in the hall. Ethan stiffened an instant before Nathan appeared in the doorway, tension radiating off him. His gaze flicked from Elena to Ethan, then back to Elena, sharp, defensive, unsettled. "What are you doing here?" Nathan asked, too quickly. "I was helping Ethan," Elena replied calmly. "You don't need to involve yourself with him," Nathan said, his voice clipped. "Our family matters aren't your concern." Elena didn't flinch. Ethan did. "I was just talking," Ethan murmured, barely audible. Nathan didn't answer his brother. His attention stayed on Elena, as if searching for cracks in her composure. But she remained steady, something in her silence reflecting the discomfort he tried to suppress. "Nathan," Ethan said again, "she didn't do anything." Nathan inhaled sharply and looked away, jaw tight. "Elena, don't speak to the investigator again unless I'm present." Her eyes met his, calm, controlled. "That isn't my decision to make, sir." The response wasn't rebellious, yet it struck him harder than a challenge would. Something flickered in his expression, fear or shame, she couldn't tell. Elena stood, nodded politely to Ethan, and walked past Nathan. He didn't move. His hands curled slightly. A quiet admission that he no longer understood how to control the situation, or her. And as she stepped back into the hall, the pressure around her sharpened. But so did a quiet certainty. Nathan Hale wasn't just losing control of the narrative, he was losing control of himself. Eleanor pushed the service cart down the hallway, aware that Nathan watched her until she disappeared from sight. Only after she turned the corner did the house settle into its usual hush, though now it felt heavier, as if bracing for something. Near the linen closet, Mrs. Clarkson intercepted her. "Eleanor, you'll work only on the upper floor today. Mrs. Hale thinks it's best. A restriction, a silencing." "Yes, ma'am," Eleanor replied. "And avoid Nathan," Clarkson added. "He's unsettled." Eleanor already knew. She moved toward the guest rooms. A new camera blinked above the archway, its red light following her every step. Earlier, it felt like judgment. Now, it felt like a witness. While placing towels in the bathroom, she heard voices nearby, the investigator and Sophie. "I reviewed some footage," he said. "Certain patterns are concerning." "Then you're seeing what I've seen for years," Sophie replied quietly. Eleanor paused, the towel in her hand still. Someone in the house, for once, wasn't blind. Then Nathan's footsteps thundered down the hall, fast, restless. He passed Sophie and the investigator without acknowledgement, but tension clung to him like a second skin. When he walked beneath the blinking camera, something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe fear. Elena stepped out, just as he turned. Their eyes met. "What did you tell him?" Nathan asked, voice low and sharp. "Only the truth," Eleanor said. "You don't understand the damage you're causing." "I'm not causing damage," she replied softly. "I'm revealing it." Nathan's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, but not in anger, more like someone losing ground. "Elena, you're changing how he sees this family. Then maybe he's finally seeing clearly." Before he could answer, the investigator approached. "Mr. Hale, I need you to review something." Nathan hesitated for a single breath, eyes still locked on Elena, then followed reluctantly. Left alone, Elena stood under the quiet blinking of the camera. For the first time, she didn't feel accused. She felt recorded, protected, seen. And somewhere in that captured silence, the truth kept gathering strength, waiting for its moment to break through. The mansion grew quieter as the afternoon settled in. But it wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that held its breath, tight, waiting, listening. Elena felt it with every step she took. The investigator moved through the halls now with purpose, stopping occasionally to study a monitor or ask a clipped question. The staff whispered, the family avoided the common rooms, and Nathan Hale seemed to be unraveling in real time. Elena carried a tray of fresh tea toward the upstairs lounge when the investigator's voice drifted from the study. "This footage contradicts what you told me, Mr. Hale." She froze, not intentionally, just long enough for the meaning to settle. Nathan's answer came tense, defensive. "There must be context you're not seeing." But the investigator didn't respond right away, and Elena recognized that heavy silence, disbelief. She continued down the hall, setting the tray on a side table. As she turned, her gaze brushed against one of the monitors positioned temporarily in the hallway, likely moved there for review. The screen showed a time-stamped clip from the morning. Nathan cornering her in the corridor, stepping too close, eyes sharp, voice tight. His posture alone revealed more than any accusation could. Elena looked away quickly, not wanting to appear as though she were watching. Still, she felt something shift inside her, relief mixed with fear. The camera had captured truth, but truth could be dangerous before it became liberating. A soft sob pulled her attention. Down the hall, Ethan sat on the stairs, burying his face in his arms. She approached gently. "Ethan, are you all right?" He shook his head. "Nathan's in trouble, isn't he? I heard Dad yelling, and Mom keeps blaming you for everything." Elena sat beside him, leaving enough space to not overwhelm him. "I'm not here to hurt your brother," she said softly. "But sometimes the truth comes out even when people try to hide it." Ethan wiped his eyes. "Nathan's not always mean. He gets scared and he hides it by yelling." Elena nodded faintly. She had already sensed fear in Nathan, buried beneath arrogance, fear of failure, fear of exposure, fear of being seen too clearly. Before she could answer, footsteps approached. Sophie appeared at the top of the stairs, her expression troubled. "Elena," she said quietly, "the investigator wants to speak with you again. He found something." Ethan looked up sharply, worry flooding his face. Elena placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered. But inside, her heartbeat shifted rhythm. Because if the investigator had found something, it meant the cameras had captured not just tension, but proof. Proof that would change everything. Elena followed Sophie down the hallway, her steps quiet, but her pulse steady and alert. The investigator waited near the study door, arms crossed, his expression more serious than earlier. When he saw Elena, he gestured for her to join him inside. The study lights were dim, the atmosphere heavy. A single monitor sat on the desk, paused on a frame she recognized instantly. Nathan standing inches from her, anger tightening every muscle in his face. The angle was clear, unbiased, undeniable. "Elena," the investigator said, "I reviewed footage from 3 separate hallway cameras, all recorded interactions between you and Mr. Hale." He tapped the screen. "This is not consistent with the version of events I was given." She swallowed gently, keeping her composure. "I told you only the truth, sir." "Yes," he replied, "and the cameras confirm it." That sentence landed softly, yet powerfully, like a door unlocking somewhere deep in the house. Before Elena could speak, Charles Hale entered abruptly, face tight with irritation. "What is the meaning of this? I heard you're questioning Nathan again. The boy is under pressure." The investigator raised a hand. "Mr. Hale, please take a look." Charles glanced at the footage, His expression flickered, a brief crack in his controlled demeanor, but he masked it quickly. "This could be a misunderstanding," he insisted. "Nathan must have been frustrated. You know how he gets frustrated, angry, untouchable." Elena stood still. She would not speak unless spoken to. She would not give them any excuse to redirect the blame. The investigator replied calmly, "I'm not basing conclusions on emotion. I'm basing them on observable behavior." Charles stiffened, as if unused to being contradicted. Just then, Nathan appeared in the doorway. He froze the moment he saw the monitor, his face drained of certainty, replaced by something rawer. Fear, maybe shame, maybe both. "What are you looking at?" he asked quietly. The investigator stepped aside so he could see the screen fully. The footage played again, Nathan crowding Elena, voice sharp, posture aggressive. His own actions stared back at him with nowhere to hide. Nathan's breathing changed, shallow and uneven. "That's not how it happened," he said weakly. But the room was silent. Even Charles didn't defend him this time. Elena watched him, not with triumph, not with anger, but with a stillness that unsettled him even more. Because she wasn't attacking him, she was simply no longer carrying his burden. The investigator turned to her. "Elena, I may need a formal statement soon. This footage suggests a pattern." "A pattern?" Nathan echoed, as if the word wounded him. "Yes," the investigator replied. "One that reflects repeated hostility toward a staff member." Nathan's fists curled at his sides. He looked at Eleanor again, this time not with superiority, but with something closer to realization. "Eleanor," he started, but the words died. She didn't step back, she didn't step forward. She simply stood, steady and dignified, while the truth finally stood beside her. The house felt different after the footage was revealed, like a crack had formed in its foundation, small but impossible to ignore. Word hadn't spread openly, yet every hallway carried a new tension, the kind that whispered beneath the surface. Eleanor felt it most clearly in the way people moved around her, less bold, less accusatory, but still cautious, as if the truth now floated somewhere they couldn't predict. She carried a stack of folded blankets toward the east wing, the same corridor where most of the cameras had been installed. As she passed under one of them, the red light blinked softly, and she wondered, not with fear, but with a quiet assurance, what it might show next. Near the staircase, Sophie appeared, arms crossed, worry etched into her expression. "Elena," she called gently, "are you okay?" Elena stopped, offering a small, steady nod. "I'm continuing my work, Miss Sophie." "That's not what I asked." Sophie lowered her voice. "What Nathan did, it wasn't right. And Dad pretending not to see it isn't right either." Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She sensed sincerity in Sophie, but sincerity in this house was delicate, easily crushed by the louder voices of pride and denial. "I appreciate your concern," Eleanor said softly, "but I'll be all right." Before Sophie could say more, another voice echoed from below. "Elena?" It was Margaret Hale. Elena straightened instinctively. Margaret climbed the last steps, her face taut with controlled irritation. "I need you in the foyer," she said sharply. "Now. The investigator wants to review something, and I don't want confusion." Confusion meant truth that doesn't suit us. "Yes, Mrs. Hale," Elena replied. Nathan appeared behind his mother, lingering one step lower, eyes lowered but restless. He didn't meet Elena's gaze. He looked like a man bracing for impact. Margaret walked ahead, expecting Elena to follow. Sophie stayed behind with Nathan. "You can't hide from this," she whispered to him. Nathan swallowed. "I'm not hiding." But he was. Elena followed Margaret into the foyer, where the investigator stood beside another monitor. This time the footage was different, clearer, closer. It showed Nathan earlier that morning pacing the hallway, growing agitated before she even arrived. Margaret stiffened. "Why are you showing this?" "Because it shows context," the investigator replied. "And it contradicts what your son told me." Nathan's steps approached, slower now. He looked at the screen, then at Elena, his voice strained. "That doesn't prove anything." The investigator turned calmly. It proves your agitation began long before the alleged incident. Elena did nothing to provoke you. Silence settled over the foyer. Margaret's lips pressed thin. Nathan's shoulders sagged slightly, and for the first time, Elena felt the balance shift, not completely, but undeniably. Not in her favor yet, but toward the truth. As the foyer fell into silence, the tension gathered like a storm cloud. Elena remained still, hands gently clasped in front of her, as the investigator paused the footage and turned toward the family. "I'll need to access all hallway recordings from the last week," he said. "This morning's footage suggests a broader pattern." Margaret bristled. "A pattern? Nathan is under enormous stress. Any footage will reflect that." The investigator didn't yield. "Stress doesn't justify misconduct." Nathan exhaled sharply, the sound thin and unsteady. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who didn't answer to his family's wealth. While Margaret continued arguing, Elena noticed something. The investigator wasn't just watching the screens. He was watching Nathan's reactions, every flinch, every hesitation, every incomplete sentence. "Mrs. Brooks," he said suddenly. Eleanor lifted her gaze. "Yes, sir. I'd like to walk through the east hallway with you. There was an unusual moment recorded yesterday afternoon. I want to confirm something." Margaret immediately stepped in front of him. "Is that necessary?" "It is," he replied simply. Nathan took one step forward, his voice rough. "What moment?" The investigator didn't answer him. Instead, he gestured for Elena to follow. They walked side by side into the corridor, Nathan trailing them despite Margaret's attempt to hold him back. The red camera light blinked above, reflecting off the polished floor. The investigator stopped beneath it. "This recording shows you here," he said to Elena. "Consoling someone." Elena felt a quiet recognition. She knew exactly what he meant. Ethan. Yesterday, hiding near the wall, trembling after Nathan had snapped at him for interrupting a phone call. "I was speaking with Ethan Hale," she confirmed softly. The investigator nodded. "And you comforted him." Nathan froze behind them. "Ethan, what does this have to do with anything?" The investigator continued, ignoring the rising panic in Nathan's voice. "The footage shows you pacing, Mr. Hale, aggressively confronting Eleanor, and then your brother appearing distressed immediately after. It suggests the tension in this household is not caused by Mrs. Brooks." Nathan's eyes widened, a flicker of defensiveness collapsing into something raw, fear, embarrassment, guilt. "Elena," the investigator said gently, "did you feel unsafe during any of these interactions?" She didn't rush her answer. After a breath, she said plainly, "Yes, sir, I did." Nathan flinched. Margaret inhaled sharply, as though the words struck her personally. But Eleanor didn't look at Margaret. She looked only at the investigator, choosing honesty over fear. The investigator closed his notebook. "Thank you. Your clarity helps." Nathan finally stepped closer, voice barely holding itself together. "Elena, why didn't you say anything earlier?" She didn't look away. "Because no one would have listened." The answer hit him harder than any accusation. The truth was no longer creeping through the cracks. It was stepping into the open. The air in the east hallway felt heavier after Elena's admission. It settled over the mansion like a quiet verdict, one that no one was ready to hear, but no one could deny. The investigator walked ahead to review more footage, leaving Elena and the Hale family standing in the silence he'd created. Margaret was the first to break it. "This is being blown out of proportion," she muttered, though her voice trembled slightly. "Nathan may have been impatient, but unsafe." "That's an exaggeration." Eleanor said nothing. The truth didn't need defending. Sophie, however, stepped forward. "Mother, you didn't see his face. You never do." Nathan stiffened. "Sophie." "No," she interrupted, her voice steady. "You scare people, Nathan. You scared Ethan, and you scared her." Nathan's gaze dropped to the floor, the weight of those words pressing on him in a way he couldn't dodge. He opened his mouth, but only a thin breath came out. The tension thickened when Charles arrived, his expression carved from stone. "I've been informed," he said, "that the footage raises concerns." "Nathan, is there something you'd like to say?" Everyone looked at him, even Eleanor. Nathan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I didn't mean to—" But the sentence collapsed before it formed. Charles folded his arms. "Intentions don't matter if your behavior causes harm." Nathan flinched, an unfamiliar reaction from someone used to automatic support. While the family argued quietly among themselves, the investigator returned holding a USB drive. "I've compiled key segments of the recordings. I'd like the family to review them together." Margaret bristled. "Right now?" "Yes," he replied. "Before we continue any further." He turned to Elena. "Mr. Brooks, please join us. You've been involved in each incident." Nathan's eyes snapped toward the investigator. "She doesn't need to be there." But the investigator shook his head. "She does. She is central to the pattern I'm evaluating." For the first time, the authority in the room didn't belong to the Hales. Eleanor followed them into the living room, her steps measured. The family settled around the television, Margaret tense, Charles stern, Sophie thoughtful, Nathan rigid with dread. The screen brightened. The first clip showed Elena walking quietly in the hallway, then Nathan stepping into frame, blocking her path, leaning too close, his voice barely masking agitation. The room absorbed the truth in silence. Margaret's lips parted slightly, as though she hadn't believed it until seeing it from the outside. A second clip loaded. Eleanor comforting Ethan. A third, Nathan pacing alone, angry before anyone approached him. The footage spoke words Elena never could. When the screen went black, no one moved. The truth now sat between them, undeniable, uncomfortably alive. And it was only the beginning. The screen faded to black, but the weight of what the family had just seen remained sharp and immediate. Elena stayed standing near the wall, hands folded neatly, her posture composed, even as every pair of Hale eyes turned, one by one, toward her. Nathan was the only one who couldn't look up. Sophie broke the silence first. "This is what she's been dealing with all this time." Margaret's face tightened. "Nathan, you told us she was irresponsible, that she provoked you, that she—" "I know what I said," Nathan whispered, voice cracking at the edges. His shoulders curled inward, the armor he'd worn for years beginning to collapse. The investigator stepped forward, speaking evenly. "What the footage shows is a pattern of escalating hostility from Mr. Hale toward Mrs. Brooks. There is no indication that she initiated any of these confrontations." Margaret bristled, struggling to keep her composure. "But this doesn't mean he intended harm." "Intent is not the issue," the investigator replied. "Impact is." Elena felt those words settle deep in the room. Sophie nodded quietly. Charles remained still, conflicted, but forced to face what he'd ignored. Nathan finally looked up at the television screen, as if hoping it would rewind and rewrite itself. "That's not— I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," he muttered. Eleanor met his gaze, calm, steady, without accusation. He looked away first. The investigator turned to Charles and Margaret. "I recommend you allow me to continue reviewing the remaining footage. There appears to be more that hasn't been addressed." Charles exhaled heavily. "Do what you must." Margaret pressed a hand to her temple, unwilling to accept the truth but unable to deny it. The investigator stepped out of the room to retrieve more files, leaving the family and Elena alone with the silence. Sophie approached Elena cautiously, her voice gentle. "I'm sorry," she said. "You shouldn't have had to deal with this." Elena offered a small nod. "Thank you, Miss Sophie." Nathan rose abruptly, the movement quick and uneven. "Don't talk like she's the victim and I'm—" "You are the one who hurt her," Sophie said, not raising her voice yet making the words land like a verdict. Nathan flinched. Charles spoke with quiet firmness. "Son, it's time you take responsibility. The evidence is right there." Nathan looked at Elena again, this time with something stripped, raw. "Elena, I didn't think—" She didn't let him finish. "You didn't have to think," she said softly. "I only had to care." The words hit him harder than the footage. Before anyone could say more, the investigator returned with another USB drive. "There is additional footage," he said, and this next part will make everything clearer." The room tensed again, because now the truth wasn't just visible, it was undeniable, and about to go deeper. The family gathered again as the investigator inserted the second USB drive into the television. The tension in the room had thickened. No one sat comfortably, not even Charles. Eleanor remained near the back, close enough to be included but far enough to avoid imposing herself. She watched Nathan from the corner of her vision, shoulders rigid, eyes fixed on the blank screen as if bracing for impact. The footage began. This time, the camera angle was from the Far East hallway. Elena stood against the wall, quietly organizing supplies. A moment later, Ethan appeared, small, anxious, hugging his sketchbook. He whispered something inaudible, and Elena knelt to listen. Her expression was soft, patient. Then Nathan walked into frame. His posture was different from before, not angry, not shouting, but unraveling. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing in short, agitated bursts. The camera showed him stopping abruptly when he noticed Ethan and Eleanor together. He didn't say anything in that moment, but the tension in his body was unmistakable, sharp, reactive, unsettled. Margaret inhaled sharply. Sophie whispered, "That's the moment Ethan told me he felt sick." The investigator nodded. "It aligns with Ethan's statement." The footage continued. Nathan stepped closer, not to Elena, but to Ethan. His tone wasn't loud, but clipped enough that even the camera caught the tremor in the boy's posture. Eleanor moved subtly between them, not confronting Nathan, but offering Ethan a small barrier of safety. The room went still. When the footage ended, the investigator paused the screen on that final frame, Eleanor shielding Ethan with nothing but her calm presence. "This," he said, turning to the family, "is what concerns me most. Missy Brooks did not incite anything. She attempted to de-escalate your son's distress, and Mr. Hale's behavior toward both of them shows emotional volatility that cannot be ignored." Nathan's head dropped. His breath shook once, barely audible, but enough. Margaret pressed a hand over her mouth. "Nathan, you frightened your brother." Nathan didn't answer. He couldn't. Sophie stepped closer to Eleanor, almost protectively now. She was the only one who noticed. Charles's voice was low. "Nathan, speak." Nathan swallowed hard, his voice rough. "I was stressed." "I didn't mean to scare him." Elena watched him carefully. There was no victory in her eyes, only a deep, steady truth. Intent didn't erase impact. The investigator concluded, "There is additional footage, particularly from the morning of the accusation, that further clarifies the sequence of events. Once reviewed, we will have a complete understanding of what really happened." Nathan's eyes flicked toward Elena, full of fear, full of something he could not yet name. And the truth, now undeniable, was closing in from every side. The investigator pressed a key, and the next video feed loaded, time-stamped just minutes before Nathan accused Elena of stealing. The room fell silent again, the kind of silence that makes every breath feel too loud. The footage showed Nathan alone in the corridor, pacing with growing agitation. He muttered to himself, repeatedly running a hand through his hair. A small box sat on the floor beside him. Open jewelry spilled inside, including the bracelet he later claimed was missing. Nathan froze when the image appeared. Sophie gasped. "Nathan, the bracelet was right there." Margaret's composure cracked at the edges. "Nathan, explain this." He said nothing. The recording continued. Nathan picked up the bracelet, stared at it, then shoved it into his pocket before storming toward the dining room, the moment before he confronted Elena. It was all there. The setup, the frustration, the need to redirect blame. Charles leaned back slowly, realization settling like a weight on his shoulders. "You knew exactly where it was." Nathan's breath stuttered. I wasn't thinking clearly." The investigator's tone remained neutral but firm. "The footage contradicts your statement. You told me you believed Mrs. Brooks took the bracelet because you found it missing, but this shows you had it before the confrontation." Margaret turned toward her son, eyes sharp with disbelief. "Nathan, why would you do that?" Nathan opened his mouth, then shut it again, as if every excuse he might give dissolved before forming. Eleanor felt the eyes on her shift, not with pity but with dawning clarity. She remained still, letting the truth speak for itself. Sophie stepped closer to Nathan, her voice trembling with a mixture of hurt and disappointment. "You blamed her for something you did, for something you knew you did." Nathan flinched, shoulders curling inward. "I didn't want to look irresponsible. Mother had already lectured me about losing things. I panicked and chose her to carry it," Sophie said softly. Charles pinched the bridge of his nose. "You humiliated an innocent woman to protect your ego." Elena's eyes lowered. The truth was painful, but it was finally being spoken aloud. Nathan looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time without anger, without superiority, without the armor he always wore. "Elena, But the investigator interrupted. "There is one more clip you all need to see." Nathan's breath caught. "There's more?" "Yes," the investigator said, "and it clarifies everything." He inserted the final file. The family leaned forward. Eleanor remained rooted in place, calm but quietly bracing. The screen brightened. A new angle. The same morning. The same corridor. But this time, the camera caught not just Nathan's agitation, it caught Elena comforting Ethan moments before the confrontation, showing she was nowhere near the bracelet box at the time Nathan claimed she took it. The truth was no longer assembling itself piece by piece. It was forming a complete picture, one the Hale family could no longer twist, soften, or ignore. And Nathan's facade, already fractured, was beginning to collapse entirely. The room stayed unbearably still after the investigator paused the screen. No one spoke. No one defended Nathan this time. The truth had shifted the ground beneath the Hale family, and every one of them felt it. Eleanor stood near the doorway, her posture steady, her expression controlled. She didn't need to argue anymore. The footage had spoken for her. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, silence wasn't used against her. It was working for her. Sophie was the first to break. "She wasn't anywhere near the bracelet," she said quietly. "Nathan, you lied." Nathan's breath faltered. He sat heavily, elbows pressed to his knees, staring at the floor. "I didn't lie," he whispered. "I just didn't want to look like I'd messed up again." Margaret's voice trembled. "So you blamed her instead?" Nathan closed his eyes. He had no defense, only regret he didn't know how to express. Charles stepped forward, disappointment heavy in his tone. "You humiliated an innocent woman, Nathan. You turned your own frustration into punishment." Nathan swallowed hard. "I wasn't thinking straight." Sophie shook her head. "That's not an excuse. You scared Ethan. You scared her." Elena didn't flinch at the attention. She lifted her head, calm but firm. "I came here to work. I didn't expect kindness, but I never expected cruelty." Nathan finally looked at her, really looked. "Elena, I never meant—" She held up a gentle hand, stopping him without force. "You didn't hurt me because you were angry, Mr. Hale. You hurt me because you didn't see me as someone who mattered." Nathan's expression cracked, guilt twisting through him. At the doorway, Ethan appeared, small and hesitant, clutching his sketchbook. When he spoke, his voice was timid but painfully honest. "Nathan, she helped me. Why didn't you help her?" Nathan turned away, unable to face his younger brother. The investigator cleared his throat. "This is not just a single event. The footage reveals a pattern of targeted behavior against Ms. Brooks. It must be addressed formally." Margaret gasped softly. Charles stiffened. Sophie nodded, as if she'd known the truth long before anyone dared to admit it. Nathan whispered, broken, "I didn't realize how far it went." Elena met his eyes, firm but without cruelty. "That's because you never had to face the consequences before." Nathan's breath shook. The truth had finally arrived, unfiltered, undeniable, and no longer under his control. The room held its breath as Elena stepped slightly forward, not because she wanted the attention, but because the moment demanded her voice. For the first time since she arrived at the mansion, she wasn't being asked to defend herself. She was being invited to tell the truth. "I came here to do my work with dignity," Eleanor began, her tone even. "But every day, I was treated as if I were a problem waiting to happen. Nathan's fingers curled against his knees. Elena continued, I was questioned for doing my job, watched in ways no one else was, spoken to like my presence was an inconvenience. She paused. But the worst part wasn't the accusation. It was how quickly everyone believed it. Margaret lowered her gaze. Charles's jaw tightened. Sophie looked at Elena with quiet, unwavering support. The investigator nodded. Please continue. Elena breathed once, steady. When Mr. Hale confronted me, he wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for someone to carry the blame he didn't want. Nathan lifted his head at that, eyes full of something raw. I wasn't trying to destroy your life, he said, voice strained. I was just overwhelmed. And I was convenient, Elena replied softly. Nathan's breath caught. The truth landed with a weight he could no longer push aside. The investigator addressed the room. Ms. Brooks has shown consistency in her statements. The footage supports her entirely. Mr. Hale's version of events does not align with evidence. Margaret stepped forward, voice cracking. Eleanor, we should have listened before... Eleanor didn't respond. Apologies meant little compared to everything she had endured in silence. Ethan moved closer to her, clutching her hand with a small, trembling grip. She was kind to me, he whispered. She made me feel safe. Nathan's eyes glistened. Pain, regret, something shifting inside him. He stood slowly, as if the room itself weighed him down. Elena, he said, voice low. I'm sorry. Not just for the accusation. For everything. I didn't see you. I didn't see anyone except myself. Eleanor met his gaze, calm, steady. Seeing the truth isn't the same as living it. Nathan exhaled shakily. The investigator closed his folder. Given the evidence and Ms. Brooks's statement, what comes next is a formal decision by the family regarding accountability. All eyes turned toward Nathan, and for the first time, he looked smaller, not because he was weak, but because he was finally real. The facade had fallen. The truth had stripped him down to the person beneath the arrogance. A person who finally understood the damage he caused. A person who would soon face the consequences he had spent years avoiding. After Elena finished speaking, the room settled into a tense stillness. No one moved. No one breathed too deeply. The truth had wiped away the last of the excuses that had protected Nathan for years. Now, all that remained was what he had done, and who he had become in the process. The investigator folded his papers with deliberate calmness. Given the evidence, this household must decide how to proceed. This is no longer a question of misunderstanding. It's a question of accountability. Margaret bristled, torn between maternal instinct and undeniable shame. We need a moment. But Sophie stepped forward before anyone could hide behind silence again. No, we've hidden enough. Elena deserves to hear our decisions with her own ears. Nathan flinched at that. His hands hovered at his sides, unsure of whether to clench or reach out. He looked at Eleanor, not demanding, not defensive, but pleading for a chance to speak. Eleanor, his voice cracked slightly. I know I've done damage. I'm not asking for forgiveness, but I want to tell the truth. Eleanor didn't move. Her stillness made his words feel heavier. Nathan swallowed. I blamed you because I couldn't face my own failures. I was ashamed, and instead of fixing the problem, I hid behind your silence. I hurt you because you were the easiest one to hurt. Margaret closed her eyes as if the admission pierced her. Charles stared at his son with a tight, resigned pain. Ethan watched with wide, frightened eyes. Sophie, however, didn't look away. And now, Nathan's gaze drifted toward the monitor, a mirror he could no longer avoid. Now I understand that none of this was her burden. It was mine. The investigator nodded once. Then the next step is simple. The family must acknowledge the harm done and determine how to restore safety and dignity for Ms. Brooks. Margaret stepped forward, and for the first time her voice trembled with something other than control. Elena, I allowed myself to believe what was easiest. I didn't question Nathan. I didn't question myself. And because of that, I treated you unfairly. She paused. I'm sorry. The apology wasn't enough, but it was finally real. Charles followed, his tone firm but sincere. This house failed you. We failed you. Nathan kept his eyes on the floor, unable to lift them yet. Ethan clutched his sketchbook tighter and whispered, "She made me feel safe, Dad." Nathan didn't. The words landed like a stone dropping into deep water. Elena breathed slowly, grounding herself. She had expected resistance, denial, pride. She had prepared for all that. She had not prepared for this level of raw truth, and yet she stood steady, exactly where she needed to be. Because everything was building toward the moment that was coming next, when Nathan Hale would be exposed not just by footage, but by the truth he could no longer run from. The investigator remained near the center of the room, giving the Hales space to speak, but not letting the moment slip into avoidance. The truth had begun to reshape the family, pulling every hidden fracture into the open. Now all that remained was Nathan's final reckoning. "Eleanor," the investigator said, "before I finalize my report, the family needs to address the last and clearest point: responsibility." The word lingered heavily. Nathan finally lifted his eyes. He looked exhausted, stripped of every defense he had used to shield himself. There was no arrogance left, no dismissal, no practiced sharpness, only a young man facing himself for the first time. He stepped toward Elena, but not too close. "I spent so long pretending I was fine," he said quietly. "Pretending the pressure didn't get to me. Pretending I wasn't failing. Pretending I wasn't scared." He shook his head. "And instead of dealing with any of it, I pushed it onto you." Eleanor met his gaze calmly. She didn't comfort him, she didn't punish him, she simply allowed the moment to be honest. Nathan's voice grew softer. "You didn't deserve to carry any of that, and I didn't deserve your silence." Margaret wiped at her eyes. Sophie's jaw tightened with quiet disappointment. Charles's stare was stern, but no longer cold. The investigator stepped forward. "For clarity, do you accept responsibility for accusing Mrs. Brooks falsely and for your repeated mistreatment of her?" Nathan hesitated only a moment, long enough to feel the weight of the question, then answered, "Yes, I do." The room shifted, as though finally exhaling. The investigator noted something in his file. "Then the consequences will follow accordingly." Margaret quickly stepped in. "We'll cooperate fully, but before anything formal, Elena deserves to hear exactly what we intend to do." Charles nodded. "This family must correct what it allowed," Sophie added softly. "And it starts with acknowledging what she truly brought into this house." Nathan's eyes lifted again toward Eleanor. "I'm sorry for every moment I made you feel small. You were the only one holding the pieces together while I pretended not to break." Elena held his gaze, not with anger, but with clarity. "I wasn't holding your pieces together, Mr. Hale. I was holding myself together." The honesty of it cut deeper than any accusation, and Nathan, for once, didn't look away. The investigator closed his folder. "We move next to resolution." Eleanor breathed steadily. Nathan braced himself, and the family prepared for the moment when truth would demand not just words but action. The resolution came quietly, but with the weight of a long-awaited truth. The Hale family stood together. No accusations, no defensiveness, only acknowledgement. Elena remained near the center of the room, not as someone being judged, but as someone finally recognized. Charles stepped forward first. "Elena, you've shown steadiness and integrity that we failed to honor. Starting today, you will oversee household operations, not as staff beneath us, but as someone this home depends on." Margaret nodded, her voice softer than it had ever been. "You worked with dignity even when we did not treat you with it. We will not forget that." Sophie gave Elena a small, warm smile. "You changed this house more than any of us ever could." Ethan rushed to her side, eyes bright. "I'm glad you're staying. It feels safer when you're here." Finally, Nathan stepped forward, stripped of all pretense. "I'm leaving the mansion for a while," he said quietly. "Not because they asked me to, but because I need to become someone who no longer hides behind blame." His voice steadied. "You deserved respect from the beginning. You have it now." Elena nodded, calm and grounded. She wasn't seeking apologies, only truth. And truth had finally arrived. As sunlight spilled into the foyer, the mansion felt different, lighter, honest. Elena walked forward, not as someone surviving injustice, but as someone who had risen through it. She had held the line quietly until the truth stood on its own feet. Now dignity was hers again, and undeniably so. If Elena's quiet strength touched you, if watching the truth finally rise gave you that feeling in your chest, if you believe more people should see stories where dignity wins, then don't leave without helping this one reach even farther. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another emotional justice story. Leave a like to show that voices like Elena's deserve to be heard. Comment below. Which moment made you feel the most? Your voice continues the truth she fought for. And before you go, click the video on your screen right now. It's another story where a quiet truth turns into a powerful transformation. If you felt this one, the next will hit even deeper.